All right, welcome back to the Corral. Today we're doing an episode where I read two completely different types of books back to back. And that's something that I like to do occasionally just to keep the mind fresh, to make your mind work in different ways. So you might read, nonfiction and then fiction, or you might read a pulp fiction story and then a contemporary novel, things like that. So what I did this time was I read, first up was The Great When by Alan Moore. Beautiful cover on here. This is a fascinating book. It was great. This is a really dense book to read. My wife bought this for me. So there are, what are here? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 8 sections. If you include the beginning, that would be 9, and then 10. There's 10 sections to the book. I read one section a day until I finished it. So it took me 10 days to read this book, which for me is a little slow. I had to slow my roll reading this book because the language is so dense. Alan Moore is a master writer, and he's also a master with the vocabulary. He knows every word that ever existed in the English language, and he uses it now and again, whatever they happen to be. So great book. I took some notes here because it's about Dennis Knuckleyard. What a great character. And Dennis Knuckleyard obtains a book. He works in a bookshop. So you bibliophiles out there will love this. That's mentioned in Arthur Macon's story N, which if you haven't read that, you should find that. It's in most of the collected editions. And it needs to be returned to the other London. So it's a multiverse angle to this. It came from this other London, this other universe area, and it needs to go back there or else he's in trouble. That's an alternate universe. So that's the basic setup. It's about as simple as you can make it, but Alan Moore is not a simple man, and it is not a simple story the way he has written it. So it's populated with great characters. I'm going to read some of their names. I wrote their names down. Gog Blinko, Sally the Turk, Jack Spot, Coffin Ada, and Mono Lulu, just to name a few. The title, The Great When, is explained on page 256 in the book. That's essentially a, spoiler alert. I think you can figure this out yourselves. The Great When is the slang term for that other London. So this is apparently, from what I read in many of the reviews, that this is going to be a series. So where it's going to go next, hard to say. He did leave the end open. There's an idea that happened. I won't reveal it. And something is going on. That could be the sequel. So we'll see. It's a marvelously written book. It's filled with some comedy. The characters that I mentioned are comedic in a way. They're very much like some of the oddball, smarmy characters you would find in a Charles Dickens novel, except with Alan Moore's wicked twist. It's funny. It's slapstick at times. It's very British at times. Very much a British novel. Probably this will go down in history as one of the all-time great British fantasy novels. I would agree with that. It should be. It's marvelous. But it takes a little bit of effort for the average reader, I think, to get through this dense language. And what was the page here? So I have a page 171, where I chose a excerpt to read that doesn't reveal anything, but it'll give you a flavor of the language, because some of you may struggle with this, especially the MTV generation where everything's a quick cut and you just want to get right to the point. Alan Moore doesn't work that way, but it's worth your time. So here is a paragraph from page 171. Without offering the incredulous Spot even a glance, plainly indifferent to the criminal's response, Gog lumbered past him and the equally astounded Kankus to where Grace had been sitting throughout all this, perched mutely on the edge of her collapsible settee. Crouching upon his mammoth haunches, the experienced marketman gazed searchingly into the motionless girl's apprehensive eyes. With their two heads in such proximity, the great disparity in scale between them was so marked that they might have belonged to different species. Very well done. Dennis noticed that Grace trembled almost imperceptibly as Blinko spoke to her, his voice the patient rumble of a cart on cobbles. That is a magnificently written paragraph from Alan Moore, and it's very dense, it's very loaded with ideas and images, and Alan Moore is a fantastic writer. You take your time with a book like this. I enjoyed this tremendously. This is a keeper. Beautiful cover on here, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Should he do it? And I believe it is. It's subtitled A Long London Novel. So Long London might be the name of the series. All of this is yet to be determined. Alan Moore, the great Alan Moore. What a wonderful, wonderful creative talent. We are so fortunate to have him in the world with us now, to make us think, to make us push ahead, to make us read these marvelous, marvelous tales. Great fun. Like I said, there's a level of comedy running throughout it with these characters, almost slapstick, stereotypical characters in a way, and yet it all works so beautifully. And you do get wrapped up in Dennis Knucklyard's adventure. So that was the first one I read. So then after this, I decided to read something entirely different. And so I read, based upon a recommendation from a friend up north, P.T. Duderman, that's Peter Thomas Duderman, Iwa 26 Charlie, or Iwa 26 Charlie, which is a call signal. This is a World War II work of fiction. And this book, I also had to take notes because the first third of this book is really detailed about the artillery spotters on the ship. So it's about Lieutenant Lee Bishop, who's a naval gunnery officer. And his job is to target the Japanese locations on Iwo Jima, and they could, from the ship, of course, they would fire artillery rounds into the island to take those positions out. That is all based upon fact, and so the plot twist is this: he's shipboard, he's a naval officer, and it gets to the point, Iwo Jima, if you're familiar with the history of Iwo Jima, brutal campaign. And it took a lot to win that island. And as conditions deteriorated on Iwo Jima, it's determined that they needed a spotter on shore. That just being on the ship and doing the spotting from there off a grid map, which he revises, by the way, which is a plot twist. And so he can go ashore and pinpoint those positions and call it in to the ship so they can accurately take out the Japanese artillery positions. That puts him in a hand-to-hand combat situation. He's detached with a Marine group, and he has to prove himself to them. So you have some of the traditional wartime tropes, you know, the different characters and all that. And he does prove himself and participates in hand-to-hand combat for the first time in his life. If there's anything implausible about the book, it's the fact that he goes through this, and, you know, spoiler alert, you'll understand he goes through it because it's told in the first person, and he survives it. Some of the hand-to-hand combat situations he's in, he barely scrapes through, but it's riveting. The second half of this book just had me spellbound. Now the author is also an ex-military man. He's an ex-Navy, a Navy officer, and retired now, and he knows his history, he knows the military, and he knows what he's talking about. The fighting on Iwo Jima in real life was excessively brutal. And this brings us to an interesting point in this book, because it is not sugar-coated. It's realistically rendered here. The Japanese military had a directive, and their directive was don't surrender. That means that they would die trying to kill as many Americans as they could. This is a historical fact. In today's world of revisionist history, there's a lot of revision out there about these battles and the brutality and so forth, with various religious groups and political groups trying to revise those incidents to fit their agenda, whatever their agenda happens to be. Everybody has an agenda these days. This book depicts the battle as it really happened, which was brutal and merciless. And the American military, and this is also historically true, they had to adapt to an enemy that would not fight a conventional war. They would not surrender. That meant the killing went on and on and on. So it happens in this book. It's absolutely brutal. It's heartfelt. You'll get choked up a little bit here and there. It's an amazing work of fiction. And I need to stress that it is a work of fiction. He's a storyteller based on historical truth. Now, in relation to that topic of the Japanese military not surrendering, the author at the end in his afterword, he talks about that very fact and how battles such as the Battle of Iwo Jima and Guam and all of these battles where the American military had to learn, you have a merciless enemy here. They're not going to surrender. How do you fight that? You have to eliminate them. You have to essentially exterminate the enemy. Highly unpopular view in the world today. Vladimir Putin, to bring it home, is trying to fight that type of battle in the Ukraine by targeting the civilian population. He's trying to exterminate what he perceives to be the enemy. Of course, we all know that Vladimir Putin and the immoral Russian army are really the enemy out there. Anyway, the author talks about that reasoning was a major factor in the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. I'm not going to go into the right or wrong of that, but that was historically accurate that the American that was Truman, because Roosevelt had passed, and the American military had to come to a determination on how to end a war against an enemy that saw dying as a victory. And so they would fight on and on and on. So you can imagine what would have happened if we had invaded Japan with an enemy like that. It would have gone on for years. And so the author makes that point. Right or wrong, I'm not going to discuss that. I'm personally opposed to nuclear war, but in understanding history, you have to understand the real reasons for those decisions. And it is expressed in this book, even though it's a work of fiction. Anyway, if you're interested in World War II fiction, Iwa 26 Charlie is a great World War II piece of fiction. Now, on the back, you get all of his other World War II books. He is an accomplished writer. This is the first one I read, and I read it as from a recommendation from a friend of mine. I intend on getting more. What's the downside here? Well, the downside is this is published by St. Martin's Press, and they're not releasing it in paperback. Go figure how stupid that is. With beautifully done covers, you can see the covers. The covers are fantastic. I'm sure all of the books are great. They all have great reviews. This was a fantastic book. Why would St. Martin's not release this in paperback? I just don't get it. The publishing industry currently in the world today they're generally not known for their intelligence. I'm sorry, but I'm calling it the way I see it. This should be released in paperback. So they are in hardcover, and when they sell out, you're looking for some of these on the secondhand market. I suspect there's not a very high print run. They are commonly available, but I don't know how high the print run is. Anyways, I wanted to get that in there in case somebody from St. Martin's should see this. You're missing out on releasing these fantastic books in paperback. You should release them in paperback. So these are my two really diverse books that I read back to back to get different parts of my mind wrapped up in the wonderful act of storytelling by two superb writers who know very well how to keep you enraptured and how to keep you turning the pages. I hope that you'll find this interesting and perhaps pick one or both of these books up and get into it, man. Get into Iwa 26 Charlie or The Great Wen. Two fantastic tales. Back to back. Diversity here at McNulty's Book Corral. A short, happy little episode. And I want you to stay well. I want you to stay happy. I want you to feed your brain. Read a book.